I'm Ruby Hartman, 30 years old. Every October, the Kingsley family holds its traditional gathering at the old three-story stone mansion on a hill outside Denver. A place my great-grandfather built back in 1936. And I, the one always mentioned with pity or sarcasm, still show up on time, still wear my old blazer, and still sit alone at the end of the 16-seat dining table. Since I was 14, after a car accident took both my parents, I'd been the appendix of this family. They never said it outright, but their eyes never hid it. Ruby? The poor girl living off other people's kindness. Aunt Lorraine once said in the kitchen, thinking I didn't hear. I stood behind the door, broom in hand, face ice cold. The Kingsleys have been wealthy for generations. They own a chain of luxury hotels scattered across the western U.S., from Arizona to Montana. My grandfather, Walter, built it all by buying roadside motels and turning them into destinations for the rising middle class. After his passing, my grandmother Grace, my father's mother, took over the company with a terrifying coldness. That woman never smiled unless it was about assets. My father, the youngest of four, was the only one who stepped out of the Kingsley Group's shadow. He married my mother, a public library clerk, and moved to a small town called Loveland. They weren't rich, but we were happy. Until that fateful summer. After the funeral, I was sent to live with Grandma Grace at the Kingsley mansion. I still remember that first morning, eating breakfast in the same outfit I'd worn to the funeral, when my cousin Brittany called me a pathetic little souvenir, while flaunting her new $6,000 diamond bracelet, gifted for getting an A in modern dance. I didn't cry. Grandma said I wasn't allowed to cry. Kingsleys aren't weak, she said. We control emotions like we control assets. In the years that followed, she taught me to read financial statements before I even mastered algebra. She showed me investment fund reports before I learned how to pick mascara. I stayed up late studying return rate charts, while my cousins booked facials in Aspen. She never said she loved me, but she taught me to fend for myself. And that meant more than words. In contrast, the rest of the family made no effort to hide their resentment. To them, I was the symbol of my father's strategic marriage failure, choosing a woman with nothing but books and a $3,000 salary. At parties, I was seated next to the server, or Aunt Lorraine's old cat. Meanwhile, they swapped stories about five-star resorts in Sedona, Cousin Jared's Patek Philippe watch collection, or Cousin Lucas being featured in a magazine for buying a $3.4 million penthouse in San Francisco. And me? I drove the old Ford Focus my dad left behind. At every reunion, my car parked between the Range Rovers, Lexuses, and Porsches, like a living reminder that I didn't belong. And each time, I still walked into that stone mansion with a smile, still sat quietly while they talked about stocks, investments, and who's the real pride of this family. Never argued, not because I was weak, but because I was listening and remembering. In their eyes, I was a negative balance. No house, no shares in the company, no Rolex, no golf club lunches. I lived with Grandma Grace for 3 years, long enough to understand that silence has a language of its own. She wasn't the type to hold me close or read bedtime stories, but when I sat quietly outside her study at midnight, I saw her poring over thick investment reports, reading glasses at the tip of her nose, dipping a fountain pen into ink like she was signing a war treaty rather than analyzing profits from a plot of land in Wyoming. One December evening, instead of a birthday gift, she slid a folder across the table toward me. "Read this," she said, eyes still on the Wall Street Journal. "It's this year's quarterly financial report for Kingsley Hospitality. If you don't understand it, don't bother coming to the next board meeting." I had just turned 17. I stayed up for 2 nights straight, looking up every term in the investment dictionary she'd given me. On the day of the meeting, I walked into the boardroom in a simple knit dress beside her, surrounded by executives in bespoke Milan suits. When Uncle Kevin smirked and asked my thoughts on the EBITDA growth rate, I replied with a question. Can you explain why this year's depreciation schedule was extended by 6 months? I think it's skewing the profit data." The room fell silent. Grandma didn't look at me, just smirked and gave a small nod. From that day on, she began to train me seriously. There were no formal lessons. Each one came as a story, a headline, or a brutally analyzed mistake. "No one gets rich by spending to be noticed," she said once, when I asked why she never wore jewelry aside from Grandpa's plain wedding ring. We had an odd agreement. I worked as her unpaid assistant. I took notes, reviewed lease agreements, even met with contractors for hotel renovations she invested in across Utah. The summer I turned 18, she let me manage a small project, revamping a rundown motel near Grand Junction. I negotiated prices, monitored progress, planned rental pricing. By fall it was booked through February. Post-renovation profits tripled. The night she handed me the final statement, I almost didn't believe my eyes. She had listed me as a 30% owner of the motel and transferred 100% of its first-year profit into an account in my name. I was speechless. "Why me?" I asked. She simply said, "Because you never asked me what you'd get out of it." At 21, Grandma passed away in her sleep. No illness, no drama. Just a winter night. She didn't wake up from. The funeral was quiet. People called her a real estate legend, but no one truly understood what made her different. They remembered her numbers and smart investments, but not how she read people through the way they spent. After the funeral, each grandchild received a sealed envelope. Brittany got $80,000 to launch her cosmetics brand. Jared received $150,000 for his gym expansion project. And me? Just a handwritten note. "Ruby, don't spend this to impress. Use it to quietly gain control." Inside was a check for $75,000. Less than what the others got. But I understood. She wasn't leaving me a large sum. She was leaving me a message. Real power isn't about how much you have, but what you do when others think you have nothing. I dropped out of my MBA program and used the money to buy a dilapidated 2-story house in a neighborhood no one wanted 10 years ago, East Lake, north of Denver. I lived on the first floor, rented out the second. 6 months later, the area got a revitalization project. 3 years after that, I sold that first house for 4 times what I paid. Somehow, I knew she was still watching, and I was certain of one thing. She'd never want me to waste energy demanding fairness with words. She wanted me to do it through shares, contracts, and signatures. At exactly the right time. I left Denver at 23 with an old suitcase, the same laptop I'd used all through college, and an Excel spreadsheet titled 10-Year Plan, packed with formulas. I rented a studio apartment in Spokane, Washington, where home prices were still low and big investors hadn't begun circling yet. While my cousins flaunted Maldives vacations on Instagram, I was combing through foreclosure lists and calling every local bank to track down pre-repossessed assets. I didn't drive a new car. I fixed up my Ford Focus with money I could have used for a new phone. I didn't eat out. I cooked 3 meals a day and learned to fix plumbing through YouTube videos. I didn't post work hard, play hard selfies at co-working spaces or spas. My only profile image was the logo of my shell company, Heartwood Property Group, registered to keep my identity off public property records. The first property I bought was a 3-bedroom house repossessed by the bank. The backyard was waist-high in weeds, the wiring chewed by rats, and the living room reeked of mildew. But the location, right between 2 roads the city had approved for future expansion. I applied for a special renovation loan designed for low-income individuals. Thanks to my carefully maintained modest income records, 10 months later, I sold the house for nearly double. I didn't spend the money on designer bags. I bought a row of 4 units in Spokane Valley, once worker housing for a nearby plant. I lived in one, rented the other 3, and reinvested the profits. Each property was held under a different LLC, all flowing through a holding company registered in Delaware, where privacy laws are notoriously airtight. I began tracking small markets on the rise but not yet saturated: Missoula in Montana, Salem in Oregon, and especially Fort Collins in Colorado. I devoured market reports, learned to read early signals before the crowd caught on. A new light rail line gets funding? I bought near it. A Whole Foods opened? I checked surrounding land prices. A school district got approved for expansion. I bought apartments near the future campus. By year 3, I owned 9 properties. In the 4th year, I bought my first commercial building, an old laundromat I turned into co-working space. I planned it all myself, hired a mid-tier design team, and squeezed every dollar to stay on budget. By year 6, I owned 14 properties, with a combined appraised value of about $30 million. Then came the strangest opportunity. I received an email from a property management firm representing the owner of a building called Maple Ridge in Aurora, south of Denver. It had 28 units, outdated amenities but a perfect location, near a hospital, a high school, and a shopping center. The owner wanted a quick sale before moving out of state. But what caught my eye was the tenant list. 3 names froze me: Jarrett Kingsley, Brittany Ellis, and young Lucas. The same people who once mocked me across Grandma's dining table. Now? They were tenants in a building about to be sold, quietly. I told no one. I didn't react emotionally. Instead, I bought the building through a brand new parent company called Augustine Partners. None of them suspected a thing. I even kept the same management firm to maintain appearances. I made only one change: the tenant approval process. Tighter credit checks, stricter screening, and a new policy memo announcing renovations to the lobby. They started complaining about the drilling, the new guest check-in portal, and the revised parking assignments by resident tier. I listened, through forwarded emails. I read Jared's message saying, "This new owner must be real estate clueless," and Lucas threatening, "I'll find a way to buy the place if conditions don't improve." I didn't respond. I just smiled. The flight from Spokane landed in Denver at 7 p.m. I didn't check any luggage. Just carried a light brown leather tote holding my laptop, printed contracts, and a steel-clipped folder. My real assets weren't in my bag. They were in the silence I'd kept for nearly a decade. The Kingsley estate sat atop Sunset Hill, facing the Rocky Mountains like an old fortress refusing to bow to time. But this time, it faced a real threat. Not from snowstorms or decay, but from the very bloodline that once protected it. This year's family gathering was scheduled to last 3 days. According to an email from Aunt Lorraine, the self-declared internal copay, the main agenda was to optimize legacy assets. Translation: they wanted to sell Grandma's estate for a development project. I arrived early on Friday morning. Martha, the housekeeper who had been there since before I was born, was the only one who welcomed me with a sincere smile. "Miss Ruby," she whispered as she opened the door. If Miss Grace were still alive, she'd never let them lay a hand on this house. I said nothing, just held her hand tightly. I still remembered the last time Grandma sat in the living room, her hand on the oak banister, gazing out at the lavender garden. "This house is not for sale. It's a memory, a reminder," she said before kissing my forehead. That afternoon, as relatives started arriving, the estate turned into a fashion runway. Brittany showed up in a brand new Ralph Lauren jumpsuit, holding a Pomeranian with a Hermes scarf. Jared parked his shiny new Tesla right at the front entrance and nodded at me like I was hotel staff. Lucas came late, carrying a laptop and a pitch deck for his Kingsley redevelopment proposal. "Ruby?" Uncle Alan sneered, giving me a head-to-toe look. "Still driving that old Focus? Durable, I'll give you that." I smiled politely. "Yes, it hasn't betrayed me, unlike some relatives." That evening, the welcome dinner took place in the main dining hall, with white lace tablecloths and Limoges china. I was seated near the end of the table right by the kitchen door. No one said anything directly, but the way Jared bragged about his new hotel chain in Palm Springs, and how Brittany raved about upgrading her Dallas penthouse with family equity bonuses, all pointed at me. Saturday morning, the official meeting began in the great room, once the heart of Grandma's warm Christmas gatherings. Now the nostalgia was replaced by a giant LED screen showing land maps, 3D renderings of condo blocks, and a profit potential breakdown. Lucas stood up to present. If we sell this land to Greystone Development for a base price of $42 million plus a profit-sharing clause on the luxury complex, each shareholder would see a threefold return within 6 years. His voice echoed like this was a moment in history. I raised my hand. What about the memories, the family legacy? Jarrett scoffed. You can't live off nostalgia, Ruby. I looked straight at Uncle Alan. Grandma said this house should never be sold. It's the soul of this family. He adjusted his tie. Ruby, you have 2% voting power. No board seat in Kingsley Capital. And no alternative plan. Don't turn this meeting into a sentimental monologue. My hands clenched under the table. Brittany tilted her head, laughing. Come on, let's be real. Ruby doesn't have the money to keep a mansion just for sentiment. They voted immediately after. Of course, only Martha and I didn't raise our hands. Even though Martha didn't own a single share, she looked at me with steady eyes, as if her voice still held more weight than all of theirs. The meeting ended with clinking glasses and plans for lunch the next day at Ridgewood Golf Club. I walked out of the room, without a single head turning. Sunday, the second day of the family meeting, began with a buffet breakfast full of croissants, imported jam, and chilled orange juice. I sat quietly with my black coffee, avoiding the pitying glances of a few relatives. They had decided to sell Grandma's estate. In their eyes, I had failed to stop it. By 10 a.m., everyone gathered in the grand living room for personal presentations, where each member reported their financial achievements from the past year. In reality, it was an unspoken contest for who made the most money, owned the biggest house, drove the most expensive car, and who, of course, still hadn't lived up to Kingsley standards. Uncle Alan went first, boasting about his lakeside hotel deal in Utah. Jared followed with a flashy report on his Phoenix commercial real estate holdings, citing growth figures no one could verify. Brittany presented slides of her new villa in Florida, including photos of a walk-in closet bigger than the apartment I currently rented. She added, "We didn't really make any big investments this year, mostly focused on resting. After all, not everyone needs to work hard to live well." Applause followed each presentation, as if they were witnessing world records. Then it was my turn. "Ruby, do you have anything to share?" Aunt Lorraine asked sweetly. Her voice that kind of artificial sugar-coating a razor blade. I stood calmly. "I don't have a slide deck, just a few personal notes." Some eyes looked up with curiosity. Most didn't bother. Jared rested his chin on his hand. Brittany scrolled her phone. Lucas leaned into his yawning girlfriend. "I still work as an independent financial consultant," I began evenly. "Living in Spokane. Income's modest but steady. Still driving the same old car, still renting." "You should let someone help manage your affairs," Uncle Alan cut in. "The family could establish a support fund for those who haven't reached certain milestones. Nothing to be ashamed of." Before I could reply, Brittany chimed in. "Ruby, if you need a place after the estate is sold, I have a condo sitting empty in Tampa. I could rent it to you at a discount." Laughter slipped out from Jared and Lucas, no effort to hide it now. I looked at them. No anger, no hurt. Just razor-sharp clarity. "I appreciate everyone's generosity," I said, hand resting on the arm of the chair. "Actually, I called my attorney this morning. I have a few updates." The room went silent for a beat. "Attorney?" Lucas raised an eyebrow. "His name is Thomas Kendrick," I said, "based here in Denver. Specializes in asset management, property law, and trust funds." Jared chuckled. "Ruby, why would you hire an attorney? You don't own anything." I smiled faintly. "Then tomorrow should be very interesting when I present my personal financial report. And incidentally, I'll also be sending some documents to Greystone Development, so they are aware that selling the Kingsley estate is no longer a decision that can be made without input from a new shareholder. Shareholder? Uncle Alan snapped. I stood up and adjusted my blazer collar. Over the past 4 years, I've quietly acquired 18% of Kingsley Capital through 3 separate investment funds. And as of 2 days ago, I secured another 4% from a retiring shareholder. Uncle Alan's face turned pale. Lucas frowned. Brittany froze in place. I now hold 22% of the voting shares, which is enough to block any decisions involving the family's core assets, including this estate. I nodded slightly. Just wanted to give everyone a heads up, because tomorrow I'll be disclosing my full asset portfolio, including 1 apartment building where 3 of our family members currently rent. I walked out. Behind me, not a single word was spoken. No applause, no laughter. Just the sound of my footsteps, echoing firmly across the old marble floors of the Kingsley estate. An answer that didn't need to be whispered. Monday, 8:30 a.m. The Denver sky was a cold steel blue, and thin sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the Kingsley estate, casting long lines across the oak floor where the official meeting was about to begin. I walked into the main conference room, still wearing the charcoal gray suit. No watch on my wrist, no earrings, just 1 strand of white pearls that once belonged to Grandma Grace. Uncle Alan sat at the head of the table, surrounded by Jared, Brittany, Lucas, and several major family shareholders. Aunt Lorraine whispered something in his ear, stealing a glance at me. Jared looked at me like I was a lost barista. "Well, looks like we're all here," Uncle Alan announced. "We'll be signing the official agreement to sell the Kingsley estate to Greystone at 10 o'clock. Ruby, if you still wish to object, you may speak, though I hope this time it's brief and realistic." I gave a slight nod. "I won't take long." I placed a black folder on the table, opened it, and slid it to the center. Before anyone signs anything, I'd like to provide an update. Because the shareholder structure of Kingsley Capital that everyone's using is no longer accurate. I nodded toward the man in a gray suit standing by the door. "My attorney, Thomas Kendrick." He moved quickly, placing documents in front of each person. No one said a word. Not until Jared turned a page showing asset valuations. "Is this a joke?" he snapped, voice louder than usual. "No," I replied. "That's my current asset portfolio. It includes 16 residential properties, 4 commercial buildings, and major shares in 3 active real estate firms in Spokane, Fort Collins, and Missoula. Total valuation, as of now, is over $78 million. I paused. "Including Maple Ridge, the building where Jared, Lucas, and Brittany currently rent." The room fell dead silent. Lucas set his water glass down too hard, spilling it across the tablecloth. "No way," he muttered. "You own Maple Ridge?" I turned to Jared. "Remember that email complaint you sent about the guest check-in system being too strict? I'm the one who approved that policy." Brittany shot up. "This is insane. You've been spying on us?" I didn't answer. Instead, I pulled out another file labeled Grace Foundation Trust. "And this is the second update. Over the past 4 years, I've gradually acquired shares of Kingsley Capital from external partners through 3 holding companies. By last week, I held 18%. I paused again, locking eyes with Uncle Alan. "And last Friday, I officially transferred all my owned assets, including companies and real estate, into a new entity, the Grace Legacy Trust." That same trust finalized a deal to acquire an additional 17% of Kingsley Capital from the Arlington Investor Group. I walked to the projector at the head of the table, plugged in a USB. The screen lit up with a new ownership chart. Grace Legacy Trust. Alan Kingsley, 35%. Alan Kingsley, 32%. The rest split among minor shareholders. As of today, I'm the largest shareholder of Kingsley Capital. No one made a sound. Jared went pale. Lucas looked down, fists clenched. Brittany visibly trembled. Aunt Lorraine looked lost, like someone who'd woken up in a play she didn't understand. And Uncle Alan? He stared at me for a long time. That look no longer held contempt. It shifted to caution and helplessness. I don't need anyone's agreement, I continued, my voice unwavering. I just need enough power to stop what's wrong, and selling the estate our grandmother spent her life building? That's one of those things. I closed the laptop. The Greystone deal is blocked. All decisions about core family assets now require a new vote. And I do not consent. Attorney Kendrick gave a confirming nod. The heritage property sale is now invalid without agreement from the majority shareholder. No one spoke. Until Jessica, the only cousin who never attacked me, slowly began to clap. The sound of her applause cut through the suffocating room like glass. "Brilliant," she murmured, then turned to Jared. "Still want to brag about your portfolio?" I looked around. Every face that had mocked me on Saturday night was now staring at me like I was someone else, someone they hadn't seen coming. I never needed their validation, but now, they'd just handed it to me. And no apology could ever take it back. After the new shareholder structure was announced, the atmosphere at the Kingsley estate shifted so suddenly it felt staged. People who once ignored me became strangely polite. The same ones who used to mock my old focus suddenly remembered I was family. Even the grandchild with Grandma Grace's business sense. That afternoon, Uncle Alan invited me to a private dinner in the wine room, a space previously reserved for valuable negotiations. I politely declined. Aunt Lorraine texted me an invitation to a weekend at the Napa Villa to discuss the company's future, attaching a photo of her wine cellar and a message, "No one knows your potential better than I do, Ruby." I didn't respond. Late that evening, Brittany knocked on my door holding 2 glasses of wine. "I know we've never been close," she said, "but I've always admired you. I just didn't know how to show it." I stared at the wine for a moment before replying gently, "Thanks, but I'm working." I shut the door before she could say more. The next day, Jared waited for me by the back terrace, where Grandma used to plant lavender and place her iron bench facing the pond. "Ruby," he began, "I think we should put the past behind us. We're adults now. I've got some ideas for a riverfront hotel chain. If you're interested in expanding." I cut him off with a slight tilt of my head. "Jared, if I wanted to invest in greed wrapped in family branding, I would have done it at 23. He gave a stiff smile, offering no reply. I wasn't angry. I wasn't gloating. I just saw things clearly. Most of them had never truly seen me as family. They only saw my value once it turned into voting shares or asset figures. I used to be the shadow, now I was the spotlight. Only because they wanted to stand in it. Jessica was the only one who hadn't changed her tune. She sat beside me at Tuesday's breakfast, after the rest of the family had quietly slipped away. "You holding up?" she asked, still in her navy knit cardigan. Those calm brown eyes reminding me not all Kingsleys were the same. "Better than ever," I said, "but tired." She smiled. "You just reorganized an empire without raising your voice, just well-timed silence. And a copy of the deed." She paused. "I think Grandma's smiling." I glanced at the pearl necklace around my neck, feeling something both warm and sharp. Like sunlight spilling across her old wooden table. That afternoon, with Attorney Kendrick, I officially transferred the Kingsley estate from Kingsley Capital's shared assets into Grace Legacy Trust, under a clause preserving its original architecture. The lavender garden, the stone bench, even the kitchen where she used to brew chamomile tea. I wasn't keeping it to live in. I kept it as memory. And the heart of something none of them had dared to build. A scholarship program for young women in real estate, and a financial literacy foundation for women who'd faced bankruptcy. I named it the Hartman Initiative, after my mother's last name, the woman who taught me to read books before I could read numbers. The internal announcement was simple: no press, no cameras, just a small sign at the front gate. This home will live on, not to be sold, but to be passed on. Months later, Jared sent me another proposal. This time, he asked me to serve as the legal guarantor for a loan to expand his failing hotel chain. I didn't reply. Brittany mailed me a wedding invite, cordially inviting you as an honored guest. I returned it with, "Thank you for the invitation, wishing you happiness, but I no longer do theater." Jessica? I invited her to join the advisory board of the Hartman Initiative. She was my first choice, and likely the only one from that family I ever wanted to trust. Because I finally understood, I didn't need to retaliate against anyone. I just needed to live in a way that preserved the values Grandma believed in. Not buried under cheap makeup labeled legacy. I didn't need to be the center, I just needed to be the foundation. Steady, self-owned, and unshakable. 3 months after that fateful meeting, the Kingsley estate wore a new look. Not of fresh paint, but of purpose. The iron gates, once reserved for cars worth 6 figures, now open to those rejected by banks for basic home loans. The sound of luxury leather shoes had been replaced by children's laughter in the backyard, once Grandma's lavender garden. I named it Grace House after the woman who taught me legacy isn't about assets, it's about staying true to your values. In just 2 quarters, Grace House hosted 4 personal finance training courses, 2 business incubators for single mothers starting small real estate ventures, and a statewide conference titled "Finance Isn't Just for the Wealthy." I led it all. Not as a CEO. Not on stage. Just as the one signing the checks, approving the budgets, and sitting quietly in a back room during every session. I still live in Spokane, I still drive my 10-year-old Ford Focus, my rented apartment is just over 600 square feet, with an electric stove and a tiny balcony that looks out at a laundromat. People often ask why I haven't moved, why I don't buy a nicer place, why I don't elevate my lifestyle. I just smile. I don't live to prove I'm worthy. When I was younger, I thought winning meant making those who once looked down on me regret it. But now I know. Winning means you no longer care what they think. And still live fully, on your terms. One July afternoon, I returned to Denver for a special anniversary, 50 years since Grandma Grace purchased the Kingsley estate. I hosted the event, but under the name of the Hartman Initiative. My tribute to my mother, the woman who taught me to love books more than spotlights. The guests weren't CEOs or politicians, they were women who had escaped debt thanks to the Grace House program. Women who once couldn't read a lease, now renting out their own first investment properties. When I stepped onto the stage, no flashes went off, no red carpet, no resume read aloud. I stood there, holding a mic, looking out at the garden where Grandma used to water the roses every morning. "Someone once told me I didn't belong here," I began. And they were right. I don't belong in a world of flaunted wealth, hollow power and status built on someone else's money. But I do belong in the place where my grandmother read financial papers and reminded me, real wealth is having the power to choose what's right. Even if no one's cheering you on. I paused. We're not here to celebrate a house. We're here to remind each other that legacy isn't what's left behind. It's what we choose to carry forward. After the speech, I returned to my seat. Jessica gently patted my shoulder, her gaze quiet but deep. "Grandma's probably sitting up there on the windowsill," she said, "watching and smiling." I smiled too. Some family members still keep in touch. Jared sent an email saying he admires the new direction and is always open to collaboration if expansion capital is needed. Brittany offered to host next year's fundraiser, but faded once she realized this wasn't a fashion gala. I'm not angry, I just see clearly now. Some people change to grow closer, others only change their surface. When you have something they want, I don't need them. I have a well-performing portfolio. A genuine partner network across 3 states. A trust fund now run by women who once lived on less than $2,000 a month, now teaching others how to build passive income. And I have one framed photo hanging in the upstairs office of Grace House. Grandma, sitting by the living room window, holding her tea, looking out at the flowers. That's how I remember her, not with titles or power, but with a silence so strong it made people listen even when they didn't want to. I'm no longer the girl placed at the far end of the conference table. And I don't need to sit at the head of it either. I just need to stand firm in my values, to hold what matters. And let those who once judged me by appearances wonder what they missed. I'm Ruby Hartman, and I don't need recognition, I just need the freedom to do what's right. Ruby's story is a powerful reminder that true success doesn't need to be flashy, and a person's worth isn't defined by recognition from family or society. In a world where people are often judged by fame and fortune, Ruby chose a quiet, steady path, not for revenge, but to protect what's right. If you've ever been underestimated just because you're different, remember this. You don't need to prove anything to anyone, as long as you're living in line with what you know is right. What do you think of Ruby's choice? Was she too harsh, or simply defending what was rightfully hers? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to follow the channel for more meaningful stories about family and life.